Welcome, Grace. Thank you for joining me for this conversation about co-creating the third attractor.
I'm excited. I feel like I've been working on this at least for, way before I even knew what a third attractor was.
Yeah, it looks like that when I looked into your different website, and it was just such a perfect fit. And I'm very much looking forward to talk to you about the many uh, different practical things, practical approaches that I see in your profile that you are piloting, that you are prototyping, that you are trying out, and probably can share your experience. But the way I start all the conversation, and I would like to do that today too, can you give us a short, your understanding of what the third attractor is, if you know the term, or if you have
Sure.
looked into the term?
Sure, definitely. And also I brought a cup of coffee because it's more friendly for us to have coffee together. So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
perfect.
to your health. Um, yeah, so it's interesting that it's called a tractor, right? I see it more as like a vortex in some ways, right? So the way
Mm,
that Daniel Schmachtenberger has presented is that there's these different polarities that we're headed
yeah,
towards, or vortexes that we're being pulled into, and one is an authoritarian kind of vortex. And then the other one is more like, it's interesting because they each, when I speak about them, I've never spoken about this before, but I feel a different way. Like the authoritarian direction feels like a vortex that we're being sucked into.
yeah,
Whereas the other one is like collapse and going back
mhm,
to primitive ways of being and like just off grid. And that feels
yeah,
like a breaking up rather than a
yeah,
vortex sucking me in. It feels like uh, a breakdown. And then the
yeah.
question is like, what might be more of an attractor? So a solar punk future or something like that. That does feel like an attractor, but the other two don't feel like attractors. They feel like unpleasant weather occurrences.
Yeah, no,
So,
that's such a good point. Even so, I would say, like, for the, at least for the first one, the authoritarianism, there seems to be an attraction for some people, not all of us, but for some people, in having somebody where they think they can take the right decisions, so that we go, that we are not crashing down. No, like this kind of looking up to an authoritarian person or figure to save us. It's kind of this savior thing that is actually, or can be, an attractor. So
yeah,
there I would
certainly.
still see it, but with the collapse, I agree, it's more like a giving up.
Yeah.
Let's go back
But there
to.
is an attraction too. I mean, I think you're right. There's different populations. There's a big attraction for eco movements, going back to the
Mhm.
land movements, off-grid movements. So there's an attraction there for a certain segment of the population as well. They all have different attractions and different maybe polarities depending on who you are and where you are.
Yeah, 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 exactly. So, how are you in your work and your being and your life co-creating the third attractor? Can we go through some of the things you are doing? Because I saw many that I'm very interested in, but I would be curious, what is for you probably the most important right now, the most important
Hmm.
project? What are you working on? And then we can probably take it from there.
Oh, so it's interesting. So I would say in some ways what I've been doing a lot of is research and then extrapolating what people are telling me into patterns. So in some
Mm,
ways, I had somebody ask me the other day when I was sort of presenting this model, like, who are you to invent a new economic model? And I said, I'm not inventing anything new. I'm going down to the regional. I would say what I'm looking at is the regional level at this point. I'm looking at the regional level and I'm looking at what communities are already doing. And then I'm trying to translate that into a digital form that could be expanded. Because one of the things that is very, people say all the time, they'll say, yeah, these tribal ways of sharing economies and the commons could never scale. And
mhm.
it's very easy to say the words that doesn't scale, but just because you said three words doesn't mean it's true. So my,
That's very interesting. I'm one of
yeah,
them. I feel guilty. I'm one of the ones that feel very skeptical how it
yeah,
can scale. So tell me how
exactly.
it will scale.
Yeah. The other thing that is like people will say, I can't imagine how it would scale. And I'm like, well, that's the problem. You're
Hmm.
describing a problem of the imagination. You're not describing a problem. You're saying, I can't imagine, which is very normal, right? Because
Hmm.
it's hard to imagine something we haven't seen. Um, or to even make the correlation. So the questions that I've been asking is, like, I did a lot of research, and the question I've been asking is, what is a network of action, rather what is a community? Because there's a lot of
Hmm.
work in putting people together in communities, like just getting a bunch of us to work together. It's like, right? But there's a lot of wonderful work being done. And I thought, but how do we connect the communities? And
Hmm.
that's where the juice is for me of the third attractor, because what you want to create is a way that we can connect to one another in meaningful ways, in real ways. How do we share our code of conduct? How do we share our surplus rather than exchange it for money? How do we? So that's the first frame I looked at is, what do you mean that you're a network of network? And I was just
Hmm.
speaking to somebody who's organizing a gathering coming up. I said, how do you feel about so and so who's on the whatever promotional thing? And they said, we don't judge. And I said, this is a person with a reputation, and we don't have any way of tracking that. And I won't mention the person, I won't mention the reputation. But I saw that person on the list, and I thought I'm never going to that thing because that person
Hmm.
is not
Interesting.
reputable in my eyes, but I have no way of saying that. All I could say
Hmm.
to this person was, how do you feel about it? And he said, I don't know that person well enough. And so we have people who should be, maybe they, maybe it's their behavior at a party, maybe it's some financial thing that they did in the past, maybe it's whatever. And we have Twitter wars against them, and we have cancel culture, but we don't have a real way of saying, is this person cool or not?
Hmm.
And uh, so I look at Ostrom's principles and the graduated sanctions, saying to them at first, bro, and then afterwards saying, whatever the graduated sanctions are. So the first thing that is really the first thing that I start with for people is, okay, let's look at what the default system has as its connectivity tissue. And these
Yeah.
connectivity tissues are quite invisible. They're not invisible once you see them, but they're not, you take them for granted. And the first one is your identity
Hmm.
representation, which is sometimes known as digital identity when you're talking about Google and Apple. That is a representation of it's me, your email
Hmm.
address. And the other one is your government issued identity card, whatever that might be, a driver's license or Aadhaar or whatever you've got. These are your identities. And that's the first way we start relating to each other. And these are identities that are designed individual to large corporation. There's no group around you.
Yeah.
You're an individual with all the other individuals swimming around relating to extremely large entity, your
Hmm.
government or
Hmm.
Google or Apple.
Hmm.
And that already, that exact infrastructure of how identity is issued, like it's kind of a stupid thing to say, right? Like God made you and issues your identity. But governments more and more think, oh, we got to make sure everybody gets an identity. And I was talking to
Hmm.
somebody and I said that at a conference about identity. And I said, well, I thought God issued identity. I said it in the like most innocent, stupid American way. Um, but I thought God issues identity, and they very quickly found something else they needed to do. You're like, oh.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So, but even the way in which one identifies oneself has already defined the boundaries within which you can operate and make decisions. And so the first thing is membership cards, what I call verifiable community, or I was just describing as bubbles. So if you can
Hmm.
imagine yourself in the world, you've got all these different bubbles around you. I've got a family bubble that I belong to, and the meta crisis community, and maybe some tighter communities, the group of people I work together with in Sideways. And in each bubble that I'm in, first of all, I don't know if I'm in or out a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Most,
That's true.
right? And that's really problematic. How do I know you're a member of the da 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 ecological group?
Hmm.
And so this is really the most important fundamental piece that we neglect to put in as a global movement or even a regional movement is some sort of membership card so we can know who's in or out.
But wouldn't you say that exactly this is a very difficult endeavor nowadays because nobody really wants to commit to be labeled something or be officially member of this, that, or the other thing? I perceive a lot of hesitance to kind of officially belong to a thing, a group, a whatever it is, no? unofficially, yes, we have it anyway, but officially, it seems to be a hard sell.
Well, I think that it's like anything, you've got a cold start problem. But the question is, I mean, in some ways, if you don't do that, you belong to Google and Apple, period. Like, not to your
Mm-hmm.
and or to your government. If you're in India, it's Aadhaar. So you can say, I don't want to have that identity card. And a lot of people are saying that. It's a big movement in the UK. We don't want digital identity. And
I
I'm sorry
know.
to tell you, but the cow is out of the barn.
And I tell you, I live in India and I'm one of the few Westerners that has an Aadhaar card. And I love it because it opens so many
Mhm.
doors. And I'm very aware of all, all
All the
the reasons
downsides.
why one would not want to have that. But the practicalities of one's life are so much easier if you have an Aadhaar card here.
Exactly. And so that's the perfect segue to why you would want one. So let's say we're a group of 10 or 20 or 100 regional entities. It might
Hmm.
be a organic farm or a eco-village. It might be a hacker space. It might be an ecological movement where we're reforesting. And we don't want a membership card. But what we'd like to do is share our bicycles with each other.
Hmm.
So what's done today is if you have a bicycle share, I have to sign up and give you my credit card, which is the other invisible thing. Like when you're using the banking system, again, this is an individualist system. Money is
Hmm.
held individually. It's not really held as a group thing. It's held
Hmm.
individually.
Hmm.
And so I've got this another individualistic thing which I can rent my bicycle because you have a bank promise basically that I will do. But what if we just said as 20 groups, we're going to issue membership cards and we're going to together maintain this bicycle fleet. Maybe we all put our bicycles in it. And then we have an electronic, it's quite easy to have bicycle share these days. The software exists, but you've got to have a card from one of these 20 organizations. Now the 20 organizations will only issue a card if they know you're going to be responsible for with the bicycle. And
Hmm.
you know that if you're irresponsible with the bicycle, the organization pays, right? You could say it's group punishment, but it's group responsibility. And then the organization says, oh, we didn't teach you how to ride a bicycle. Let's sit down, or let's make sure everybody in our group has helmets, or whatever they decide to
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
They can rehabilitate you so that you know how to use the bicycle properly. I mean, again, I'm using this as a very simple thing.
No,
That's how
no, but you
you
know what is
share
interesting?
commons. Yeah.
What is interesting, Grace, you might find it interesting that I actually worked for the first company that did exactly this with cars in Switzerland. The first car sharing company was founded in Switzerland in the long time ago. I think it was in the 70s and 80s. And they did
Mm,
exactly what you just described. They said, we seven people, it was literally seven people that shared one car, and the company still exists as a corporation, a cooperative. Do you say cooperative?
hmm
So everybody has a share. And
Right.
they have now 3,000 cars that are being shared and obviously used by smart apps and everything. So, yeah.
Yeah. I just want
And
to point
since,
out the difference between what you
yeah,
described and what I described, because it's really, this is the fundamental of how you scale community,
yeah,
right? Because right now, what happens is that you come to this, wherever it is in Switzerland or whatever, there's a few in also Belgium, and you join the car share,
yeah,
and you have to stand up to the terms of the car share. Next
yeah,
door, there's a bicycle share. You sign up, and you, as an individual, join the bicycle share. And
yeah.
you have to stand up to the terms of the bicycle share. And then you go next door to the community garden and you as an individual. And so each one of these entities is holding a membership list, terms of use, financial thing, and all that stuff is held in each of these things. I'm
Mm-hmm,
saying a different thing. I'm saying these
mm-hmm,
20 neighborhoods issue membership cards to responsible members. And depending on your membership card, now you belong to all three of those things together.
yeah,
So it's not three
yeah.
different databases. And in fact, there's no database, which is why it's scalable. There's no database. As
Mm,
the neighborhood, I'm going to call it neighborhood. I'm just going to close this a bit. It's too much sun probably to see my face.
yeah.
There we go. As a neighborhood, my neighborhood, and I'm just going to call it neighborhood, but it could be eco village, it could be hackerspace, it could be church, whatever it is. My neighborhood makes sure that I'm cool. They train me to use a car and they only issue me,
The
right?
physical neighborhood.
The physical, we can call it the physical neighborhood or whatever community I belong to, the community that I'm reluctant to offer my membership to, right? But that
Yeah.
community vouches for all members of the community. And maybe you have to pass a test before you become a member. Maybe you have to do 100 hours of work before you become a member. Membership may mean different things in different organizations. But the
Hmm.
car share just says, or the bicycle share just says, if you're a member of any of these 20 neighborhoods, the 20 neighborhoods create the car share together. But each neighborhood, whatever they are getting the number of hours from the car share, not the individual. The responsibility goes from the individual to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that allows much more commons sharing and it makes the membership worth something. Right? And
Yeah.
it allows commons to emerge because it's very easy to say, you know what, I'm gonna whatever, create a tool shed and I don't have to manage a membership list and money or whatever, da 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 da. I just have to get the buy-in of these 5 neighborhoods. We'll start with 5 neighborhoods and you have a much easier way. You take off all that overhead. And you also can reinforce your values with each other. You can say, this is our code of conduct. Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It sounds amazing. And let me ask you. So I understand one thing is the community is making sure that you can trust the members. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's the community is the body that creates the trust.
And
How
vouches.
and
Vouches. Like
vouchers.
I
How
vouch for my members. We all vouch for each
yes.
other. It's very different than I vouch for you. It's very easy for me to say Daniela is cool, but I don't really have responsibility. But if I say these 20 people vouch for each other, we have responsibility now.
And how much do you think this can be scaled? I would feel very insecure to vouch for more than, I don't know, probably 20 people that I really know
Totally fine.
well.
Yeah, so it can scale. You can say every neighborhood is 20 people, and every group of 20 people has their own, or 20 families. They have their own ethics. We don't care what your ethics are. We don't care how you run your group of 20. Maybe you have a priest, maybe you have sociocracy. It's not important to the bicycle share, the car share, the whatever it
Hmm.
is.
Hmm.
What's important is that you, as a group of 20 people, 20 families, vouch for each other that you're going to be cool, whatever cool is according to the rules. And if that group isn't cool, the entire group is removed from the shared commons
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
never allowed.
Hmm.
And so the size of the group will depend on the group. It's completely agnostic, but it can scale. The scaling, I can talk a little bit more about separately. I just want to make sure that like it's kind
Hmm.
of clear this idea of your bubbles, right? It could be your neighborhood. It could be that the mayor issues the neighborhood list of valid neighborhoods, right? So first of all, there's your groups that you belong to. You belong to many of them, and they all issue certificates or credentials, you can say.
Yeah.
Some of the credentials might be worthless. It's like, okay, you belong to the church, but it doesn't mean you're trustworthy because the priest lets everybody in. And so it's great. You've got a credential, but it doesn't really mean much. I mean, it means you can
Mm.
behave in a church. So maybe an auditorium might accept it as a behavior, like, okay, this person knows how to behave in church, they can go to the cinema. But it doesn't mean a lot, right? But if your eco village issues it, like you've lived in an ecological intentional community for 3 years, I mean that membership card means a lot. So different membership cards or different credentials for different bubbles you belong to will give you different rights, and the trust level within each group is different.
Mm. Hmm.
Okay. And so going back to our example, I'll just go back to one more example until I talk, and then I'll talk about the scalability.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there might be within the bicycle network a neighborhood, the rich guys neighborhood. And the rich guys have a way of bringing up their children, not all of them, but a few of the rich guys. Whenever somebody breaks a bicycle, whenever one of their adolescents breaks a bicycle, they buy a nicer one for the collective. Okay. So now the collective can decide, should we keep that group with us? Because the rich dudes, this is how they bring up their adolescents. And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of nice. We get nicer bicycles. But do our values as the bicycle cooperative align with that? And that's an
Mm-hmm.
option that whoever is holding the common good, the thing that they're offering, we call that the validation network. Whoever is
Mm-hmm.
validating your credential because they have something to give you, they get to decide on what types of communities they are willing to lend their bicycles to.
Mm, I see. Yeah.
So the power is completely decentralized because I've got the bicycles. Maybe those guys over there will accept you to their bicycle network. But like for me, I don't want a group of people who raise their adolescents that way. I understand boys will be boys, but not here.
Yeah.
And so there isn't, so it is kind of a graduated sanctions. And then
Mm-hmm.
the rich dudes can say, oh, wow, that's kind of, we've been kicked out of more and more of these groups. Let's sit down and figure it out. Or they can say, screw them, we'll just buy our own bicycles. Right.
Yeah.
And
We
that,
don't need them.
yeah, we don't need that. And it's
Yeah.
agnostic to values. Like this is one of the things that I'm really sure about is that I don't know what values are the right values for everybody. So everything that I'm building allows that kind of agnosticism. If this group thinks that money should buy you everything, they can have their network alongside the other network. And maybe the food is like anybody can. I mean, you give dog food. If somebody's running out of food, you're going to share your food. So the values that you have for the food might be very different, but they got to bring their own bowl because those
Mm-hmm.
guys over there, they use one single-use plastic, so those guys have to bring their own bowl, but we'll fill it with food. So you
Yeah.
can have a values-based system which is not coercive. It's semi-coercive because if I have the food, I can decide. But it's mostly non-coercive because you can belong to whatever club with whatever values you want.
But when you do this free of values, what is the implication then for example, of resource management? I'm talking resources, well, global resources, yeah.
Yeah.
Because if
Okay.
you, yeah.
Okay, so the first thing to say is I don't know. And I'm very suspicious of all of the solutions that are like, we have a global solution, right? I mean, our stated goal on our website is planetary
Mm-hmm.
governance, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you can see that identity is a part of governance because how you issue the identity. Is there a king who issues it? Is there a database behind it? Does it gather your data? All that stuff is governance already before you made a
Mm-hmm.
decision. Um, but I don't believe that I know how it'll scale on a planetary level, but at this point, I understand how it'll scale on a regional level. Because what
Yeah.
I did was I went and I did some research with some of the eco villages and I went and looked at how they're actually operating. And how they actually operate is from village to village. And it's not necessarily an eco village, it might just be the ecological co-op next door to them, or it might be the town nearby or the township, whatever. How they operate is they have bilateral agreements among entities, not individuals, but among entities. This village is providing you lumber because they're trying to get rid of the invasive species. And that village is providing you a truck. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
exchange or share. And, there's a bunch of these different share agreements between these two. They're hard to
Yeah.
manage on this individual basis because it's kind of all in your head. It doesn't scale. And so, can we digitize that type of a sharing network? And that's how I'm viewing it. Is like we can digitize those relationships by saying you've got membership cards. Now, any one of your members can send their children to the kindergarten over there. Any one of your members can do this and that. And then you can also resolve among your members. Okay, hey, listen, you didn't go to that many work days this month. So what's going on with your village? So that's how I imagine resource sharing. And I imagine, because we're already sharing resources, like the river, we're sharing, the water, the air, we're sharing. And so I imagine it's something like 20, a prototype will work with like 50 villages and entities in an area. One might be an educational or a retirement home or a hospital, or a healthcare thing. And they have these different agreements among them. And then we start to see, okay, what are the relationships? You can start to measure what's moving back and forth. What are the resources? That's a separate system, the actual resource management system, which I've also designed a
Mm-hmm.
pattern for. Um, which I consider it's sort of a reputation economy. I call it a sufficiency economy. But the idea is that when you do an interaction, I don't call it a transaction because sometimes it is transactional, like the trucks and the trees. And sometimes it's we invited everybody for a work day so that we can build the compostable toilet together. And these 5 villages sent 3 people, and those 2 villages sent 1 person, and those guys brought the pie, and and there we all had a work day, but there was no real exchange. It was like we had a work day, and people came, and they had a good time, and whatever it is.
Hmm. Hmm.
And what I think the currency of that is, the thing that you want to see, again, currency is what I want to see, the current that I want to see
Hmm.
between us is is fairness. I called it fairness, and then we had a lot of discussions, and we decided to call it coolness, right? Did that feel
Yeah.
cool? Did it feel cool? Yeah, I went to the work
Just
day,
on
I
a
worked all
feeling
day,
level,
and it
and
felt cool. Yeah.
just on a feeling level,
Hmm.
that is something that I'm very interested in, how to do that, because my personal experiences with trying out new ways of even pricing things have been very frustrating, to be very honest. Like when you do online courses or when you do also offline events and you say you can give what you want. It's either donation based or there are different levels of prices. It's not yet what you're pointing to. I'm aware of that, but it's going in that direction because I grapple a lot with the question how to make fairer exchanges, because you use the word fairness, yeah? How to do fairer exchanges. My own experience in trying to do that is that the understanding of what is fair is so different in people. You can meet a very rich person that has no idea that fairness would mean that he or she would pay 10 times for whatever it is than the village boy that comes to the same event. And you can have very poor people that almost overstretch themselves to be as fair as possible. So my I think my trust in humans assessment of what is fair is very low. And I'm
Yes.
happy to hear from you that you have different experience.
So I'll say a few things about that. The first thing about that is that I taught a workshop, which I may teach again, I don't know, on, it's called The Future Ain't What It Used to Be, on money. And the first thing I said is pay what feels right.
Yeah.
And then I didn't talk about payment until the fourth workshop. And then I put people in breakouts rooms and I gave a suggested price. And the breakout room was, how did that feel? And people came
Yeah.
back with all kinds of answers. Some were like, just send me the invoice. I can't deal with it, you know? And some
Yes,
people were like,
exactly.
right? And some people were like, look, I really have nothing right now. What do I do? And some people were like, well, after each workshop, each week, I send you what it felt like. It's like,
Yeah.
and the person who said that, by the way, said, I hope it's not causing you a lot of extra work with invoices. And I was just like, of course it is. Like like you even know that you're causing me more extra
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
It's nowhere near the suggested price,
Yeah.
right? And then somebody else said, and this
Exactly.
is true, it's like, I don't even know whether I'm contributing to the course by, because it was a workshop, by bringing my
Mm.
knowledge, or whether I'm taking a course on it. And that's exactly right. So the
Oh,
first thing you're
yeah.
pointing to is that monetary value is completely detached from anything. It's a weird number.
Hmm.
And none of us can make sense of it really. Okay. And the only thing that there is when you're on the receiving end or not receiving end is how much do I need this money to pay my rent?
Yeah, exactly.
And how
Rent and
much is my
food and
rent? And I started toying with the idea of doing like, okay, this is how much I made, like making it totally transparent, how many hours I'd put in and like making it like, how do we take better care of our stewards? And I haven't seen that experiment run, but I was talking to the Commons community hub in Brussels about this, about like, okay, why don't you put like a visualization of the event you're doing, right?
hmm
Here's the bucket that's filling up. And when it fills up, it spills over into our fund to buy the building. right?
Yeah.
And so people can see how's the bucket going. They didn't use that visualization, but that's what it might mean to do it. But but that's a really big problem, and this solution doesn't look at it that way because fairness is community to community, not individual to individual. That's the first thing to
Hmm.
say.
Hmm.
And the primary way that I want to create this is mostly for non-monetary transactions. And some of them might involve money, some of them might not. So, for example, I went, in addition to the one that I told you about the truck and the wood, I was at an eco village, and the volunteers would come every morning and they'd split the volunteers up. And I was in a group that would go 3 times a week to the local vegetable co-op, whatever agricultural co-op, and we would do work. And then we would weigh how much we'd picked or whatever we'd write. There was a place where we'd write it down. And I said to the person who was organizing it from the eco village, so what's the agreement? And they said, well, for the first year, we're just writing everything down and then we'll see.
Mm.
So I'm not inventing this. This is the reality that is happening on the ground right now, is that people are doing all kinds of things. They're doing beach cleanups. They're mentoring. They're doing podcasts. Like, you're not paying me, I'm not paying you. This is the
Hmm.
reality. This is the reality. And we're actually creating a lot of non-monetary economic activity. And we don't know how much we've done, who's given what. And most importantly, if you're trying to build a regional, because again, remember, I'm talking about the network threads between them. The real thread is, did I feel cool about it? Because if I did, next time it's my turn to contribute, I'm going to contribute to them. Or it's my
Hmm.
turn to throw a party, and you know this with your group, right? If that's the people who always throw the Halloween party, and that's the people who always throw the, whatever, the dinner soiree, and each group in that group throws a different party, and there's those people never do, but they really have a small house and they always bring a little bit more extra food. And we know they just have a small house, right? And it feels
And
cool, even though it's not even, right?
yeah, and are you saying that this is spoken about, like when you prototype this kind of behavior, is it something that you would want to establish as a principle at the beginning, that people are, because I sometimes also feel like people are not aware. If you make them aware, they probably act a little bit different, but they are very much in
They're
their.
very unaware. It's really interesting, right? People who live in those societies, and you may, but I live in a society that's sort of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I was staying at a at a ranch for a while. And the next door neighbor was hooked up to the same water thing. They never got like official water supply. So the ranch was providing them water, and they would do favors for us. And one day they said, we ran out of olive oil, which I understood
Mhm.
to mean we asked for too much.
Mm.
Right. And in each, and so I brought them a full bottle, like a big bottle of olive oil, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I knew that for a couple of weeks we couldn't ask for the next thing.
Mm.
This
Yeah,
is
that's interesting. Yeah.
happening, right? So again, people say I didn't invent anything. It's the reality on the ground right now that I'm trying to digitize so we could scale it. And so what I
Hmm.
would suggest, what I'd like to prototype, and I haven't prototyped because it'll take me a few $100,000 to do this, because the problem is the training and the prototyping and then the deployment and the customer service. Like, the software you can build,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
all of that other stuff there has to be a project manager who speaks
Exactly.
the language on the ground. And I had some people in Basque Country in northern Spain who are interested in trying this out. And when I say people, it was like 20 communities. And so how I
Hmm.
envision it happening is we would have a 2-day weekend game, probably two of them, 2 different weekends, where we have little playing cards. I've actually played this online with people like maybe 20 times. People love this game. You pretend to be, whatever, the municipality, you pretend to be the eco village, you pretend to be the old folks home, and we all take our little role and we pretend to do some of these group projects together. So I would want to have sort of a 2-day LARP, live action role playing game, and prototype it. And if I can get 20 communities to each one of those 2 days, probably by the end of them, we'll have 20 communities or 30 communities that are like, yeah, I'm willing to try it for 6 months.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then develop the software based on what actually happened in those games, because those communities know what they're doing, and it's going to be different in Spain and Italy and India. Like, it'll be very different. And
Hmm.
so prototyping it with real communities, that's what I would imagine that I'd like to get done as
Hmm.
a prototype. I don't know if it'll work. I'm not that arrogant to think, oh, let's scale it to the whole world. No, let's try it with 20
Yeah, yeah,
communities. And the game, the object of the game, I'm going to call it the game, but also in real life, is to reduce the amount of money per individual needed. Because money is a
yeah,
sign you're in that system. You're in the individualistic system and you're dependent on the minute. So if you're buying petrol, you're dependent. And so you
yeah.
might be at a place where you're like, we've got whatever, this region, and we've got 20 or 50 organizations and we're working together, but man, we keep spending money on plumbing. Does
Yeah.
anybody have an open house they could, an extra spot to build a house or an extra living unit for a family where the head of the family is a plumber? Okay, great. Let's find some plumbers who want to move out to our region and would like all
Hmm.
their housing taken care of, all their food, all their kindergarten taken care of. And then they'll live here. And then we've reduced the amount of money per person because we no longer have to pay for a plumber. We brought a plumber to live in our communities. And so that's how you
Interesting.
might
Yeah,
expand it. It might be like, oh, well,
yeah.
we have a lot of food. We need a packing plant for storage over the winter if you're in a country that has winter. So we're looking for a drying facility and we bring them in. And so we no longer have to pay for the canning facility. And so you could imagine more entities moving into this economy as they see it works, because what the economy is designed to provide is sufficiency. I don't have so much money anymore, but I have the confidence that my house can't be taken away from me and that when it's mealtime, everyone eats.
Yeah.
And that's the purpose of the game, of the initial economic game. So that's one of the economics. So that's another component of what you saw that I'm doing. And
Yeah.
the way that
Uh,
that works, it doesn't necessarily need the membership card for that one, because what that one does is it has a purchasing manager for each entity. I'm calling it a purchasing manager, but really only one person has to interact with this system, which is typically the situation, right? If you've got a little co-op, there's one person in or two people in the money department. And same if you've got an eco village, you've got one person who has to deal with all that invoicing and stuff. So actually, you can have a very large system with thousands of people in it, but only 50 or 100 users because you're operating not as an individual.
mhm.
So it also reduces the overhead on everybody for the exchanges.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense.
Okay.
I think where I'm still stuck is, and I hope you don't mind when I ask these questions because
Oh, I
I
love
really
it.
grapple with these questions.
I love it.
Um, why do you feel it's easier to have the fairness? I'm coming back to the fairness and
Mm,
the fair exchange, the cool exchange, that it's easier between communities than between individuals. What is happening there in that step that you feel it's
okay.
working better?
So this goes to the also to the membership card. This actually speaks about why does the membership card come from your community rather than I vouch for you, and if I've got 100,000 people vouching for me, I must be cool, right?
Yeah,
It's the same question.
yeah.
So the question is, why is that better? So the first thing is that as a community, I know that and you see that when you work for a company, I have to preserve the reputation of the community as a whole. So if I'm
Hmm.
that representative, I need, I need to stay in the network and to keep getting sharing opportunities or economic opportunities. My group has to be cool with all the other groups.
Hmm.
And again, I'm going to call it cool we called it coolness instead of fairness.
Yeah.
When things
So,
start to be uncool, I'm going to be taken out of that economic system. And so there's a need for the community to maintain coolness. Now, if you're doing a transactional relationship with some company and you're sick of them, what you do is you stop working with them.
mhm.
The purpose of this economy is to increase the local sustainability, the local ability to get your supply chain locally, right?
Yeah.
And so when you measure the coolness, let's say and this is actually a true story of the pine trees and the truck, it ended. And when I talked to somebody like a year later, I'm like, oh, how's that going? They're like, oh, no, it stopped. And they didn't know why,
Mm.
right? No money was being exchanged.
Yeah.
Nobody knew when it ended. Maybe the purchasing manager changed. Maybe the whatever it was, something happened. Maybe the truck broke down. I don't know. It ended. And
Hmm.
nobody
Hmm.
knew. And it because it wasn't about money. And they everybody, but I knew in that exchange, everybody felt awkward. Like, am we asking for too much wood? And they're like, we can give them more. We're just cutting down all the pine trees anyway because they're destroying our environment. We need to restore the and everybody felt super awkward all the time about how many trees was worth how many hours of truck. Like I knew
Yeah,
that
yeah,
even
yeah,
when I was there, right? It wasn't my job to say
yeah.
something. But all the time, because it was a weird, everybody felt awkward. And if there
Mm.
were a coolness factor that we could see, we could also see if it goes up or down. Like, is it getting cooler or is it getting warmer or whatever it is, whatever you want to call it. This is the only thing that matters in that kind of exchange. It doesn't matter the
And you
money and
would,
out, right? It matters
yeah,
like, do
yeah,
we feel cool? And it's not a personal judgment. That's the other reason it works better in a group.
yeah,
I'm not making a judgment about Daniela. I'm making a judgment about that weirdo spiritual community, like those integral people. I don't know. They say blue, red. I know the integral theory, but I understand. But they're like quadrants. They're talking in this
yeah,
weird language. I don't like it's a judgment on sort of that group. Are they reliable as a group? Do they show up on time? All that stuff. It's not a judgment on Daniela. And so it's easier for me to
yeah,
say the truth.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's not my
Yeah, that
judgment,
makes
it's
sense.
my group's judgment. Like we had a
Yeah,
meeting, we talked about it, right? It's really different than I said this about you.
yeah, yeah, that I can totally see. And in the end, we are all implicated. And it's almost like the group, the individuals want to take responsibility for the group's reputation. That
Yeah.
it kind of boils
Yeah.
down to that. How would you measure the coolness? Like because you talk a lot about the
Yeah.
digitalization. Is this something you would actually measure and keep somewhere in a
Yeah,
ledger?
so
And
that's what I want to prototype. And so when we talked about it, it was like we had a 5-day sprint and we spent a full
hmm.
day just talking about this thing. Like, what do we mean by
Hmm.
fairness? What do we mean by coolness? How do we measure it? And we're not there yet. But our and this was before LLMs when we did it. So right now, what we're imagining is people would just speak how it went and then
Oh,
whatever.
yeah,
But but
and
the
yeah,
coolness they might give a coolness factor. The coolness factor goes like this. It felt cool. It was an even exchange. It felt cool. I gave more than I got, but it still feels cool. I mentored the person, whatever. I went to the workday. It felt cool. They gave me something for free and I got more than I gave, but it felt cool. Like those are the
yeah,
three levels of cool. And then there's uncool, which is something like um there's uncool, which is like, I gave more than I got. And then there's uncool, like they really gave me too much. I feel obligated. And then there's just something didn't feel right about it. Uncool.
yeah,
So there's
yeah,
kind of three ways it can be cool, three ways it can be uncool. And the last way is like something just didn't feel right. So you don't even have to be specific about it.
yeah.
And as you can
Can I
imagine,
ask you?
again, yeah,
I have a real life example.
yeah,
I'm very
yeah,
curious what you would do, and it's a little bit different. Therefore, I want to ask you. It's
yeah,
not an extra. We live here in a sustainable village, very small. Only just
yeah,
started 3 years ago. Only
yeah.
few parties, like seven, eight, nine parties, houses, people, and the guest house. And we are only right now thinking about creating a recycling plant with an incinerator that can burn the left, because in India it's a
Yeah,
nightmare, the
real
garbage
problem.
management. Yeah, it's a real problem. So, but in this interaction, there is no partner. There is no. So what I'm interested in, because we are in the middle of it, and two of us, two parties of us, just now decided, me and another party, we will just do the pre-investment, the investment, and then see what we can build with it and how it looks like, and then we can probably promote it to other villages and showcase it. And we are very excited about doing it, but we are not confident that even the other uh, parties of the village be willing to give the appropriate amount of money to do the investment. And it's not an interaction. It's not like that we give and then we get something back. We actually want to, what we want to get back is a good feeling inside of us to feel better about our own village recycling situation. That's kind of what is coming back.
Yeah.
So that's a little different situation. And yeah, one
Yeah,
that
this is really important. So, um, that's why I want to prototype it with groups that already kind of have some things in place because,
yeah.
and that's why I think that it'll take quite a budget because we're going to have to solve some of those problems. And I'm just going to say a little bit more about the problem that you're indicating.
Yeah.
In some places, it's going to be quite easy, right? I was mentioning Basque country. The Basque people are still doing some things very collectively. So there's already some collective, and I gave you examples of some collective things that are being done in
Hmm.
the Basque country. So it's kind of natural for them to do that. In America, it's going to be almost impossible because
Hmm.
they don't have anything that they do collectively, right? In most of the world. Although as soon as a disaster or a flood comes, then they start to do this collective thing, and that may be opportunities to start this. But I saw
Yeah.
this problem exactly what you're saying. I went to a place where they called me in to do a full day session on how do we do this type of thing in our region. And they called me in and they paid me in the whole thing. And they brought their top, people who are the most collective ecological groups. And one of the people there was a farmer who had managed to rent enough land with 10-year leases to grow heritage grains, and he wants a mill because no mill is going to take less than 3 tons of stuff, right?
Hmm.
And I said, well, what do you guys think about the idea of some of you invest in a mill? In the equipment and in either a 10-year lease or a piece of land. Land prices are going up like crazy. It's not a bad investment. Maybe you'll have to live in a slightly smaller home, or you get enough of you together to buy this thing. You put together training courses, you work together with the high schools, you train people to use the equipment, blah, blah, blah. And, I brought up this idea. Why don't you create a commons? And I said, listen, the thing is, all of us go and we buy our nice heritage grains, and we don't think we have an obligation to this man. He was around 60 years old, 55,
Hmm.
60. He was not a young man. I said, we've broken our relationship with this man
Hmm.
who's been providing us
Hmm.
organic food for his whole life. He's been in debt. He's gotten himself out of debt. He's pulling himself up by the bootstraps. Why? Because we think it's our right to eat food and put all the burden on him. So what if we did
Hmm.
this instead of doing that? Why don't we do this mill thing? And there was sort of a little bit of quiet, and one of the people said, "Hey, I know this zero interest loan that he could get." Right? That's still putting everything on him. They
Yeah,
could. It was
exactly.
like it was like we had to move on.
Hmm.
The mentality, that relationship between what we put in our mouths and where it came from is
Hmm.
so broken. And it's the same thing
Hmm.
with you. Our relationship between where our poo goes and where the wrapper for our candy bar goes,
Yeah.
like our what comes into us and goes out of us, our relationship is so broken that
Hmm.
it's very difficult to reconstruct. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, and I don't have a solution, but that requires deep work for us to say, hey, as a community, let's start to take responsibility for this. And let's not put all the debt on one person and all the investment on one person for this, because that's not the reality. The reality is we all throw things into the garbage.
Yeah. Yeah. But wouldn't that mean, in my way of thinking about it, and also in many of the conversations I had about the third attractor, when we come to this specific point, it all ends up being about the individuals in the development, like literally a spiritual development and inner development that goes as far as seeing the whole again and not just the individual's need, or very, very profanely said, going beyond the ego, going beyond selfishness to actually be able to act for the sake of the world and not just for the sake of myself. Is that something that comes into play in your way of thinking?
This is always true of everyone. Like we are always growing. And even an entrepreneur, when they come up with like Tony Robbins says this, it's, he's a big, coach for business. He says the reward for a problem solved is a bigger problem. And he and he says entrepreneurship is a spiritual game because you're
Yeah.
trying to grow. And when you grow in the physical world, you're going to be growing in the spiritual world. I believe there's a completely intertwined things.
Hmm.
And I also believe they have to be done uh, in group. You need a sangha one way or the other. You can call it sangha or not, because
Yeah.
not everybody's going to develop together. Not everybody's going to develop at the same time. And that's why, so if you're working with a group that's more, let's say, on the individualistic side, you want to start with bicycle share and tool share, things that don't threaten my, you know,
Hmm.
that aren't so, it's just convenient to flush the toilet. What are you talking about? Compostable toilets, right? It's just flush. And same with garbage removal. It's just like we move it over there.
Hmm.
So starting with the low-hanging fruit and creating that community. And then the other thing that I was talking about was code of conduct, communities of communities. So if there's a community that's growing more food and we're more connected to one another, then the sanctions we can impose on each other. Like I said, some people are going to have to bring their own bowl because we know that those guys don't recycle. And we'll feed
Yeah.
them, but they got to bring their own bowl. And
Yeah.
so when you're a group of 20 communities or 40 communities that are dependent on each other for stuff, there's like, I don't know, like everywhere I've been, people keep getting born and they're born usually very immature, right? Some of them are reincarnations of different monks, if you want to believe that. But most people are born really immature.
Hmm.
And so we're not all going to get to the same spiritual level all at once. But that container of groups who are sharing things one another, they can monitor one another. And that's nothing new,
Hmm.
right? All of the religions do that. Villages have always done that for each other. Those guys over there are raiding our sheep, and we're going to go over there and do this and that. And for most of human history in the small groups, it hasn't been a warlike way of resolving it. Like people didn't want war. Nobody wanted to lose their children. And so we went over there and we had a little peace offering and we tried to forgive each other. And in some places, you had to slit certain people's throats. Every community had their own way of doing it. But right now, that kind of thing has to be done also around our waterways. Who's polluting the waterway? Okay, these 30 communities need to walk upstream, sit down with those guys who are doing whatever they're doing there and say, guys, um,
Hmm.
we don't want any accidents to happen to your electrical lines. But all 30 of us communities downstream are having a problem. So, in order to prevent a problem happening with your electrical lines or your expensive equipment, we need to settle this problem.
Yeah.
And you could call that like protection or violence or threat, but that's what has to happen. People and communities are good at self-regulating. They're good at keeping their water clean. They're good at keeping their neighbors in line when the structures allow for it. And that's what I'm trying
Hmm.
to create structures of community to community codes of conduct that are not orchestrated above anywhere, but where I can at least identify, okay, this is the community we need as a group of communities. These are the 10 communities that live along this river, or the
Yeah.
10 entity. It could be the 10 nonprofits that are trying to restore the river. And these are the authorities we need to go to. Let's have our 10 nonprofits get together and go to these authorities, or let's have these 10 authorities practice civil disobedience or whatever it
Yeah.
is appropriate in our area. And that's what's missing for the third attractor. The movement that we're talking about, addressing the meta crisis, whether it's the ecological movement or the social movements, it's the biggest movement in human history
Hmm.
by any measure.
Hmm.
And the connectivity issue isn't there to do the things that I've mentioned, to say, okay, these 50 organizations are going to practice civil disobedience together. And if
Hmm.
those
Yeah.
guys get out of hand, they're going to lose their membership cards. And this is what out of hand means. And this is what out of
Yeah.
hand doesn't mean. So let's say that you, I don't know, whatever, you spilled some soup on a Van Gogh painting, for example. And now your government is looking for you. You could have a network of places, of safe houses for those people,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Right now, we can't do that. And
Yeah.
not passing judgment on soup, but I mean, as an Israeli, that is the best terrorist act I've ever seen in my life. It got
Hmm.
just as much publicity as any other terrorist act. It was about an existential crisis, and not one person was injured.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the most peaceful terrorism I've ever seen in my life. Gluing yourself to an
Hmm.
airplane, putting some corn flour on Stonehenge. It's brilliant. It's nonviolent terrorism that makes headlines.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but we do need to protect those people. Those are our
Yeah.
heroes. We need to protect them, and we don't have the infrastructure to protect our heroes.
Hmm.
Even just financially, making sure that they have a meal every night. We don't have that for any of our ecological warriors. It's really, this is the tragedy. It's not, there's a tragedy of not having the funding that we need because whatever funding comes in dribs and drabs. But the big tragedy is that we, as the largest human in human history, as the people who really are growing the food, who really have the power to take this into our own hands, we don't have the network. Because
Yeah.
I don't think there isn't a third attractor. I think there is a third attractor, but all there isn't is the fibers that connect us.
Yeah.
And and it's
Yeah.
not an online social network, I hate to tell you.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's
I believe that.
right. It's identity, it's resource sharing, it's the spiritual development that you're talking that allows us to resource share. It's trust in one another and a trust in the
Yes.
universe and creating trust groups. Like that's why I'm talking about these small communities. You can't create trust at a global level without a credit card. You can
Yeah.
only create it with your 20 best friends, and those 20 friends have to have the right to say to you, Grace, you talk too much.
Hmm.
And this is what we're going
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
about it. You know.
Yeah. What about leadership? Tell me what you think about leadership. How does leadership work in your third attractor world?
So it's very distributed and it's very so okay. So in my world, it's first of all, each organization does their own leadership how they want, their own decision making. Like within your organization, there isn't a best way to do it. And then, as you can hear, these reciprocal relationships with one another are actually self-regulating. They're self-regulating. Now, there's always leaders. There are people who are taking more responsibility. There are people who have more leadership capability. There are people who are coming up with the ideas. There are people who are executing the ideas. And there are
Hmm.
probably people you have to send to the council to represent you. But the I think the main thing is to try to create a system in which there isn't a lot of potential for huge inequities of power.
Yeah.
And then leadership kind of evolves naturally within those things.
Yeah. And
We
also
all are
depending on
leaders.
the skill set, no?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
I read somewhere on your website, and that resonated a lot, that leadership has to be able to change depending on the
Of
topic
course.
and depending on the skill level. And that is not the case today. Today's leaders think they have a say about everything, more or less.
Well, that's also our forfeiture.
Yeah.
We forfeit a lot for convenience. It's interesting. I'm trying to coordinate a group right now, and I got really very harsh feedback from one of the people saying, this isn't sociocracy. I said, no, it's a duocracy, right? It's a group that had fallen apart, and they asked me to step in and to help out. And I said, it's a duocracy. The people who stepped in to pick it up have picked it up. And she said, well, who decided on that? And I said, you did by saying, I'm not going to volunteer here anymore because of the past. I said, you
Mm-hmm.
decided to let me do that by not
Yeah.
stepping in. I said, you want my job, take it, right? And this
Yeah.
person couldn't handle it. Like to this person, that wasn't a decision, but it is a decision. If you're in a group of, it's a 70-person group, and three of us are doing all the work, and that's a decision by all 70 people, each of whom will either do or not do the work.
Yeah.
And that's it. And when more people participate, then we can have sociocracy. But the decision to not have sociocracy happens when you don't show up for the meeting.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
she keeps asking, what happened? Who's deciding? Who's deciding? And I'm like, you. but she can't, like, they can't hear it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The 67 people who aren't participating don't want to hear that they're actually
Mm.
making a decision by their non-participation.
Not.
And that's
Yeah. Yeah.
also leadership. We don't want to think of it as leadership, but it is. When you say, no, I'm walking away, I'm giving up, that's a kind of leadership. And it's not the most empowering type, but it's a
Yeah.
reality. And I don't,
Yeah.
I look at my body and I don't have leadership. I just have, like, when there's a disease, the white cells come along and they do something about it. And if you have a healthy community, it's like everybody does their thing until you hear that the next town over they're doing child sacrifice. And then it's like, all right, we better go do something about that. But most of the time, like, let them do whatever they want. I don't care. Let them marry who they want. Let them have polygamy. I don't care, you know, but not with their children.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I'm sorry for that, but I actually come back to the scaling question because I'm not sure that I gave you enough space to explain the scaling, because I was just thinking when you bring up these examples, that all is very intuitively accessible for villages, like even where I live, like Indian rural village, this
Yes.
village here and the next village, they can have their rules. And as long as they leave me alone, we leave them alone, or whatever it is. But I am having a hard time to see the transition of the big cities, of the municipalities, of the big, yeah, the cities, like
Okay.
8 million here in India, Mumbai or Delhi, or 12
Yeah.
million.
Yeah.
That transition, I cannot even get my head there. What would need to happen in such a system as you're describing it
Yeah.
to work in a city?
So I'm going to say a few things about that. First of all, look, the third attractor, it's not going to happen in 50 years,
True.
right? We're talking about a 200-year process if we're lucky.
Yeah.
So we all need to, like, kind of chill and be thoughtful and recognize that it's not happening in our lifetimes for most of us in most places. There will be small, I mean, I live in a small country. I live in a 2 million people country in Slovenia.
Yeah.
It might happen extremely quickly here. In fact, the a lot of the older traditions haven't died yet because new country
Hmm.
is a 30-year-old country.
Yeah.
Um, so some places it'll happen fast, some slow, but this is a transition over lifetimes. And some ways of life will and won't be like they won't be sustainable. The scalability is built into the system because it means that you can have your bubbles and you can have a list of trusted bubbles. We call that a registry. And
Hmm.
this works normally. Like if you have a university system in your country, there's a accredited universities list, right?
Yeah.
But that's only held by your government. But actually anybody could put out a list of the universities they trust. And so the same with these bubbles. Like anybody can put out these are a list of the communities that belong to our network, or these are the
Hmm.
communities we trust with bicycles, or these are the community. And so these registries allow this to be complete. There's no one authority. Anybody can say, I'm authority. You can buy my list for $10 a month. I've actually visited these villages and I know that they practice equality for all, right? And then you pay me $10 a month for going around to eco villages and finding out which ones belong on the registry, right? I test them if they recycle, whatever it is. So these third party registries don't have to be with the government. And it creates overlap. So it might be that in your region, there's one network that doesn't even talk to each other, but they're two networks that are holding each other to different values.
Hmm.
In cities, I don't know how it's going to work, but a lot of the activity, of course, happens in cities. In cities, I mean, Mumbai, I know nothing about India. But if you look at cities like New York or San Francisco, there are people doing solar, there's people doing hydroponics, there are people converting old buildings into housing, into tiny homes, there are people who are trying to do urban farming. And right now, we have not connected any of those things. Each bubble is its
Hmm.
separate bubble. But if we started to
Hmm.
connect them in the city, in Barcelona, there's a whole lot of stuff going on. It's not clear that cities are sustainable.
Yeah.
It's not clear how many people are going to make it through this transition, or how many cities are going to. I mean, even in COVID, you go to different cities. I mean, now things look more or less the same, but there's some cities who never, like, just didn't recover. I mean, you go to Paris will never be the same. It's just,
Mm.
and that's multiple factors, right? But
Yeah,
London
yeah,
looks
yeah.
the same. Weirdly, Milan looks pretty much the same, and I thought it wasn't going to come back. So it's interesting, right? So different cities will transition in different ways. Some of them will become sustainable. I mean, there are technologies for indoor farming. There are technologies for all this stuff that might, you know, from the rubble. We're in composting phase. I also tell people this, like, recognize that we are in the composting phases. And I'm right here in the autumn in the mountain, and I'm really aware of it. It's like there's all these leaves on the ground, and the mountains look really bare, but there's like mushrooms.
Yeah.
There's mushrooms. And that's where we are. Like we can't expect anything more than like a few, like in my lifetime anyway, like there'll be a few little fungal things that come up, and some of them will be edible and some of them won't, and some things will die, and literally and not it's really interesting. This is a time where we have to recognize we're in the composting stage. And so there's some
Yeah.
nice compost around that we can grow stuff from. And in some place, things haven't quite composted enough, and we need to help metabolize rather than, hospicing modernity rather than, building from whatever, building in the ruins. Like we're doing both depending
Hmm.
on where we are. We're hospicing and we're building from the ruins. And that's the
Yeah.
transition we're in now. We're not through winter. We're kind of not even beginning winter yet. We're kind of in the
Hmm.
autumn in terms of seasons. And so these things that you're asking, like in the spring, we'll see what grew. And the things I'm proposing are experiments and prototypes, and I don't know
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
going to happen in cities. Different cities will do different things.
yeah. Where will AI help and where will it not?
Again, I don't know the answer, but I do know one thing. AI has caused a tremendous amount of more damage than it has caused goodness. I know that. Just look around you.
Yeah.
And I just wrote this on LinkedIn today, in fact. It's if you look around, I was talking to some programmers who are really benefiting the most from AI in terms of the speed at which they can build stuff. And I said to this program, I'm like, okay, so is your life better in any way? Or is it just you do different things during the day? And he thought about it and he's like, you're right. Like I can sort of do things faster. There's some things that AI can't do, but it's demanded of me. So I'm moving faster. I'm less satisfied with the code I'm writing. I have less control. If there's a bug, it's more of a pain in the butt to fix it. So in some ways, I'm producing more, but my salary didn't change. My working hours didn't change. And I'm just doing kind of different work, which is a little
Hmm.
less creative than what I used to do and gives me a little less control than what I used to have. So, in what
Hmm.
way did it make his life better? In what ways did it make anybody's life better? It's replacing jobs. It's making our jobs like different but not better. It's not, and we know how many people it's killing, not to mention the data centers. It's like, is it actually doing anything good? Is a very legitimate question right now.
This, are you using or are you not using it?
So I do
Or are
use it.
you?
I
Yeah.
use it for some things. I use it for research. It's a little bit,
Yeah.
dubious, but it does help me with research. It helps me brainstorm some of my ideas. I don't use it for writing at all. I'm a
Yeah.
professional writer. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Yeah.
replaced my job. It's made my life very unsustainable.
Yeah. Hmm.
I do think there is a role for it. And AI is kind of a really big category, not
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
necessarily for LLMs, for big data and for real AI in understanding what's happening on the globe, being able to process a lot of measures. I think that there's a lot of uses for we're all reporting in. There's a little measurer in the ground, there's a measurer in the sky, there's a measure in the, like, these actual data points that can tell us, is the health of the planet going this way or that way? We all know it's going to be going down, but how much and what have we done?
Hmm.
I think that for those types of things, yes. For
Yeah.
coordinating the societies and for things like a minimum viable economy that is everybody eats, and the food travels the minimum kilometers, it's things like that, helping us solve problems like how do we get rid of this invasive species, or how do we distribute or maybe giving us alerts when some family didn't go to the store or whatever, hasn't had any
Hmm.
food. Like, I do think there's a use for AI, but I think we have to be very careful about what it's good at. It's good at processing a lot of data points that we can't process and cross-checking them.
Yeah. Yeah. That
So
makes a lot of
that's where I
sense.
see it. Yeah. But I want to, definitely say, like, we have to be real. This thing is
Yeah, yeah.
not, it's not the doomers that it's going to wipe us out. So far, it's been bad, on
No,
a
no,
balance, on
I
balance.
basically agree with you. And
Yeah.
where I cringe is when I see the people starting to interact with ChatGPT as if it was a person, and give the answers they get as much value for their personal life as they would give a human being. There is, yeah, there is something very
Yeah.
not healthy happening there too.
Yeah. And we're going
Yeah,
to lose a whole generation of people who won't know how to mate
yeah,
and
yeah,
can't
yeah,
find somebody who's as good for them as the chatbot is, that
yeah,
don't understand what
exactly.
human relations are about. Like we really are,
No,
people are having children later and later in the Western world, like, and beyond, like, okay, there's electricity, so you have something to do at night, so maybe fewer children. Like people are not getting married
yeah, yeah,
and not having
yeah,
children.
yeah,
And I mean, okay, maybe we need to reduce the population, but not having a companion for life because you're too incompetent
yeah.
to have a companion and you think AI is your companion. This
Yeah.
is not a good state.
That's the worst, exactly.
It's the worst. Yeah. Because it's lovely to have people in
Let
your
me
life.
ask you a last question if I
Okay,
can.
good. Sure.
um, about myth building. Should we have a new myth, new stories, new big stories to for the third attractor?
I don't
I
know.
saw that you created this comic book for girls, yeah,
Girls.
to
You
get
found that
into.
one. Pulled that one
Yeah,
up.
I found that one. So I was thinking, what I was just curious what you think about myth building for this moment in time. Is would it be important to have kind of a new story of how the third attractor world could look like in 200 years, in 500 years?
I think that, so I'm not a myth builder. I do think, as Amanda Scott says, we need a lot more Thrutopian fiction. Whether
Yeah.
that's movies about a Thrutopian future, whether that's the novel that she put out and some other Thrutopian novels. We need to be able to visualize what the future could look like. There's this game I've got on my shelf. I can't. It's called Earthborn Rangers, and it envisions
Mm,
a world after, like, whatever, a few thousand years of people having to go underground. Like they build all these machines. This is the idea. They build all these machines, and then they go
yeah.
underground while the machines clean up the toxicity, and then
Oh,
their
wow.
buildings open up after a couple thousand years. And then they're the Earthborn Rangers. It's really an interesting mythology. So we need, first of
Yeah.
all, those abilities to visualize what we might need. How did we get through it? I'm not a myth builder myself,
Hmm.
and I am a religious person myself. And my
Mm,
mythology is really interesting. Like the existing mythology, the Judeo-Christian mythology is not as flawed as we think it is. I mean, there's a lot of stuff about not sinning against nature. There's a lot of stuff about not being jealous. There's a lot of
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
about the consequences, right? The consequences of doing the wrong thing. Like that's what, and so yeah, it's more patriarchal, whatever. The mythologies exist and mythologies evolve. You can't create them. It's like trying to change people's language. Like we should call people, I'll just give an example, but like African American, it never took.
Mhm.
People still say black. That person's black. They're not, and and that I'm white. And you can't make that change. Language is an
Mhm.
evolution and mythology is an evolution. And I think
Mhm.
our stories are always evolving. And I think we need to consciously create visions. That's why I want to play live action role playing games with people. Because I don't think the tools that I just described to you, we've developed a bunch of live action role playing games. What I've described to you is a description, but to play a full day of a game with these memberships and with, I've developed this game with, we have to feel viscerally that we can see it. And also there's another group that's created some bioregional games. We have to feel
Yeah.
viscerally what it might feel like, at least the next
Yeah.
step in order to take it. And mythology evolves. Like there will be stories that are passed down, just like, Beatles song. Everybody can sing Beatles songs. The Beatles didn't
Mhm.
write them thinking this is going to be the new things that people sing to their children.
No, no, exactly.
But it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that makes sense. Great. What did we not talk about that you wanted to talk about?
I don't have anything. I think the one thing that, that we're all aware of that we don't talk about enough is our, and we have talked about it a little bit, our inability to steward, to, not to steward, our inability to resource one another,
Mm,
inability to get the resources from those who have it, who kind of have goodwill, but there's a really big
yeah,
trust gap. And sometimes that takes the form of people who are dying, but their children, they don't have children, want to pass their land on, and they don't know who to pass it on. And sometimes it takes the form of philanthropists who are spending down their fund and they don't know who to trust. And sometimes it just takes the form of like really lack of will to pass that money on.
yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes it takes the form of not being willing to do the civil disobedience that's required to take back the land. We we are all so strapped,
Mhm,
and it's so hard to talk about.
mhm,
Like to overcome our money trauma and say, like, look, are you going to make it through the month? How many of our groups
mhm.
say that? Are you going to make it through the month? Can you pay your rent? For how long? And
Yeah, yeah,
that, yeah, that's really essential to our movement, really talking about what is sufficiency and how do we support one another. This transition is going to be hard, and what are we going to have to sacrifice, and who's going to end up. And there's plenty of mythology about that and fiction about that, about people who ended up on the streets because everybody said, oh, so and so is rich and they're a stingy person, and in the end that person starved to death. Like there's tons of stories like that that
yeah, yeah.
we don't even know that our neighbor needs us, and we don't feel resourced enough to help them even.
Yeah, and that leads us back to the trust issue, no? How do we build trust even among few people, and then more and more and more? How do we build a
Yeah.
society that basically trusts and can be trusted?
Well, I think
That's the
that
big.
that's your question about spirituality. How do we trust that the universe will provide? I mean, I had some experience in the last 2 days. I'm like, I've been working with the bioregional movement, with the regenerative movement for a year and a half, and it hasn't brought
Mhm,
in enough income. I've been okay, and like these last couple of months, I'm like, I'm not going to be okay that many more months. And over the
mhm.
last 2 days, like the precise amounts that I was like, oh, that needs to come in, have been mentioned, haven't come in yet. But it's not only trust in one another. In fact, it's probably not primarily just trust in one another. It's probably spiritual question like, okay, non-attachment. I'll be okay. Mother Earth is holding me. Even if my family of origin is difficult, I have friends to turn to.
Mhm.
If push comes to shove, somebody, and you know that from any hard time you've been in your life, the people who supported you were not the people you expected to.
Yeah, yeah,
This always the case. You don't know who's resourced at that moment. So it's more of trust in the universe than trust in one another, I think. Um, yeah. And it'll take us
yeah,
a
and
couple hundred
just
years.
exactly, and trust in our own ability to co-create. In my religion, my lineage, however we want to call it, which is evolutionary enlightenment, the basic belief or position is that we are part of the co-creative God force or life force that moves forward, and that we want to respond to that calling as good as we can. We want to be conscious co-creator of what needs to be created even without big strategies, just responding to what life presents in front of our noses, and respond as appropriate and as context relevant as possible, and then take it from
Yeah.
there with a huge trust in the, as you say, in the universe, in God. We can call it whatever we want. It's in the end, it's all about trust in life, and
Yeah.
trust that we are part of this life. We are not separate. We are that life that wants to move forward and
Yeah.
transcend into something better, I hope.
Yeah. And some of it is easier for people at our stage of life to say, which is like, look, I'm
Yeah,
going to be composted. But
yeah,
that's not easy for somebody who's 16 to say.
No, it's not.
I'll be composted sooner or later. So maybe my, immediate needs or my survival in this very beautiful home in the Alps isn't so important. It's easy for me to say. But somebody of
Hmm.
reproductive age, that's not what they should be saying.
Yeah, yeah. No,
So
it's so true.
it's easier to trust at our age. It's easier to be like, okay, well, if it doesn't work out for me, that's okay. I've already had my children, like a little picture in the back,
Yeah,
and.
yeah.
So I'm
I've
aware
left
of
mine
like
out.
I can be very equanimous and it looks very wise, but I've already had my children and raised them and they're
Hmm.
independent now. And so I can say
Hmm.
things that not everybody can say from a spiritual level. It sounds really smart,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's not very real for a lot of the world.
yeah. So true.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. That
Well,
was
thank you.
delightful and
Likewise. What a
educational,
pleasure.
and I will have a lot to think about. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
it's such a pleasure. And yeah, and I hope I'll be able to make some of your workshops. They look really fun. And
Yeah,
yeah, I won't
that
be
would be
coming to
wonderful.
India. I won't be coming
Yeah.
to India, but it's a little far. But we're thinking about doing a third attractor. Me and a colleague are thinking about doing open space technology for third attractor get-togethers on this continent and in the
Mm,
Americas, because that's where we are. And so,
yeah.
yeah, that's something we've been thinking
Let me
about.
know if, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes I come to Europe.
Cool. Yeah, we're looking at how do we put that together and how do we make it, again, the
Yeah,
question of who's financing it and how do we make it really open? Maybe it'll be online and pay what you want. And we're looking at all these
yeah, yeah,
questions because we do think that open space technology brings together people in a different way.
yeah,
And we we really want to do it in that same ethos that you're doing it is like, we want to make this offering to people rather than
yeah,
say, okay, we're going to make money from, we'd like to at least sponsor ourselves, but how do we make this an offering that everyone can have access to is
yeah,
really,
yeah,
I
exactly.
love the ethos of the way you're doing that.
Yeah. Thank you so much.